Today's story is going to spook you, scare you, and get you asking, what if there is more to that silent neighbor that lives among us? Today's story involves 5 people: a bishop, a street guy, and 3 women. And for this story, we have to travel to Kihoto, an estate in Naivasha, Kenya. Here, something disturbing was unraveling in August of 2008. 2 women were being held against their will in a room. Their flesh was being cut, their blood drawn, and the man responsible will later make a confession so disturbing that the media and the public will give him a name that is still scary up to today. They called him the Naivasha Vampire. So, you might be asking yourself, what kind of heinous crimes did he confess to that earned him that name? Well, that is why I'm here today. So sit back, relax, and listen as I take you through this darkness. My name is Yusuf, and this is Silenced by Chipuko Media. And before we get into any details, if you are a fan of true crime, deep dive, and scary stories that deserve to be told, well, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because that will ensure that you don't miss our next episode. On the evening of the 14th of August 2008, a teenage girl stumbled outside a compound in Kihoto Estate. Her body was covered in wounds, her dress drenched in blood. This girl could barely stand straight. When neighbors approached her, she started speaking of things that felt unrealistic to most of them. She spoke of a guy who had abducted her, kept her in a room for days. She spoke of torture that she was being subjected to on a daily. She even spoke of another victim, another woman that unfortunately she had to leave behind. This teenage girl was Esther Akinyi. The residents quickly notified the authorities. The police came, and when they forced their way into the compound, they found Naomi Wanjiru, the other victim, on the ground, lying on the ground near a hole. Naomi's body had turned pale. She was barely conscious. It is correct to say that she was on the verge of dying. In fact, investigators will later say that if the rescuers were even seconds late, Naomi Wanjiru could never have made it. So, the 2 women were quickly rushed to the hospital and investigations commenced. While the police had begun their line of questioning to the residents, they quickly uncovered the identity of the man who occupied the house. His name was Geoffrey Matheri, but the residents knew him as Fongo. But no sooner had they begun the investigation than they found out something that turned this from a mere kidnapping case to something far darker. But before we get into that, let's get to know who this Geoffrey Matheri is. According to his confession, Geoffrey Matheri states that his life began in Naivasha. He was born there, but his childhood was marred with a tragedy because at a very young age, he lost both his parents. So, together with his siblings, they were taken in by relatives in Kinangop. At Kinangop, Matheri says that life was tough. His relatives were very harsh on him and his siblings. So, on one fine day, he decided to drop out of school and go and live on his own. The only place he knew was Naivasha, so that was his destination. But you should remember that in Naivasha, Matheri has no relatives, he has no family friends, he has no support whatsoever. So he landed straight into the streets and became a street child. Like many other street children, Matheri survived by scavenging for food, petty crimes, and at times sniffing glue to escape the harsh reality that he was in. This went on for years, and as Matheri states, his life changed the day they were approached by a guy. Matheri states that one day, as he was sitting in the midst of other street guys, they were approached by a man who gave them a very enticing offer. The man asked who among them wanted a better life, a house, a wife, and even financial support. For Matheri, this offer was too enticing to refuse. So amongst the street guys that were there, he accepted the offer. And that day, he left with the man, and together they lived for about 1 month at this man's residence. It was during this month that Matheri learned the other side of the bargain, because this better life, wife, house, and financial support wasn't coming for free. Obviously, there was something he had to pay for it. And sadly enough, he had to pay in blood. Not his blood, no. Matheri was instructed by the bishop. Yes, this man was a bishop. His name, Jeremiah Paranjo of the New Hope for All Nations Church based in Naivasha. So Matheri claims that the bishop instructed him to go out there, kill people, and deliver specific body parts and blood to him. The instructions were, if the victim was a man, he had to chop off the genitals. And if the victim was a woman, he had to chop off the breasts and deliver those specific parts and blood to the bishop. Matheri says that he wholeheartedly accepted the mission. He went out there and started killing people. At first, he will do as instructed, but as he progressed in this mission, he started feeling the urge to test the blood and human flesh. And he did so. So eventually, he will not only kill those people, he will drink their blood and eat some of their flesh. I made a mistake in telling you his confession before the arrests. So going back to the investigation, while the police were investigating the happenings of that particular compound, the search for Geoffrey Matheri had begun. Matheri managed to stay on the run for 2 days, but on the third, he was caught in his hideout at a hotel in Naivasha. After being arrested, it didn't take long before Matheri made that confession. And you see, part of his confession was implicating the bishop. So the police went out and arrested the bishop. But arresting a bishop in Kenya is such a big deal that this became a national scandal. Unfortunately, there was nothing whatsoever linking the bishop to the crimes of Matheri. No physical evidence, no forensic evidence, no even witnesses. So it didn't take long before the bishop was released and all charges fell on Matheri. So we've gotten to know about the guy, the street guy, and the bishop. Now let's introduce the 3 women. We start with 2, Naomi Wanjiru and Esther Akinyi. You see, the happenings of that room that Matheri occupied started for Naomi Wanjiru on the 9th of August 2008. At 7:30 p.m. of the 9th of August 2008, while Naomi Wanjiru was walking to the shop, suddenly she was surrounded by 4 street guys, and they abducted her and afterwards delivered her to Geoffrey Matheri. Geoffrey Matheri took her to his residence. Immediately she entered the house, she could feel that something was badly wrong. There was a heavy stench of meat, the smell of blood, and the faint sounds of someone crying. Matheri instructed Naomi to climb the bed and lay there. So while she was climbing the bed, she now felt that there was somebody else on that bed. That person was Esther Akinyi. Unfortunately for her, she had been abducted by Matheri days earlier. And she was being taken through torture extreme torture that we'll get to know about later on. Naomi Wanjiru, in part of her statement, says that in the days that followed, she witnessed unspeakable horrors happening inside that house. She says, on some days, she will witness Matheri biting off flesh from Esther's back and drawing blood from her into a cup, and he will chew the flesh and drink the blood as one will eat bread and down it with tea. On other days, she will witness Matheri drawing blood from both her and Esther into soda bottles, and later on at night he will leave with the soda bottles filled with blood. These were among other horrors that she could not even talk about. She says that on the day of the rescue, Esther managed to escape, alerting the residents who called the police. While Esther was out there, Matheri had noticed her absence and decided to do away with Naomi Wanjiru. So he took her out and made her lie near a hole he had initially dug, and he told her that this was going to be her grave. Naomi was laying there, ready to accept her fate because she was tired. She just wanted all of this to end. But fortunate for her, the rescuers came early enough before the unspeakable happened. I had told you earlier that while investigations were continuing, the police had uncovered something that turned this from a mere kidnapping to something far darker. For that, we have to introduce the third woman. But unfortunately, she doesn't enter the story alive. While the police were in the compound collecting evidence, they discovered disturbed soil in one of the houses. After digging through, they found the decomposing body of a woman buried there. This woman will later on be identified as Miriam Wairimu. An autopsy conducted on the body uncovered very serious injuries. Her right ankle had a deep cut. 2 of her toes had been amputated. Her right nipple had been cut off. There were multiple stab wounds on her body. Even her rib cage and lung had been punctured into. It was clear that the person who had killed her had taken her through extreme torture. The pathologists concluded that this woman had died from severe blood loss. Now we proceed to the courts. But you should remember that Matheri has multiple cases to answer. Involving Naomi Wanjiru and Esther Akinyi, Matheri was charged with physical assault, sexual assault, and illegal confinement. In the other case, Matheri was charged with the murder of Miriam Wairimu. We begin with the cases involving Naomi Wanjiru and Esther Akinyi. In court, the prosecution fumbled. They could not prove that Geoffrey Matheri was indeed guilty of sexually assaulting Naomi Wanjiru and Esther Akinyi. They could not even prove physical assault, even though there were pictures of Esther Akinyi's back showing clear bite marks, human bite marks, but they could not prove that. They were only able to prove the lesser charge of illegal confinement, to which Matheri was sentenced to 4 years in prison. While he was serving that sentence, the case of the murder of Miriam Wairimu started. But in this case also, the prosecution was running into problems. They needed to prove 3 things. That first, Miriam Wairimu was dead, and she had died because of murder. She had been murdered. And third, that Geoffrey Matheri was the one responsible. On proving that Miriam Wairimu was dead, the prosecution had nothing. They didn't have a clear identity of the body. Even while the autopsy was conducted, the pathologist had identified this as a body of an unknown woman. No family member had come forward to claim the body. No death certificate had been issued by the government to prove that Miriam Wairimu was dead. So, The prosecution had nothing to prove that this was Miriam Wairimu. Then, the only thing the prosecution had to link Matheri to the murder was his confession. But that confession could not be used in court. Why? Because Matheri had not been read his rights before it was recorded. So it was thrown out. The other thing the prosecution had was the house in which the body had been found in. But here, they had nothing to prove that that house truly belonged to Geoffrey Matheri. They had no eyewitnesses to ascertain that they saw Matheri burying the body there. So that also fell. The prosecution had failed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Matheri was responsible for the murder of Miriam Wairimu, and that case was thrown out. Matheri ended up spending 8 years in prison, and after which he was released. On the day of his release, the public had not been notified, so when they saw him out, they thought that he had escaped prison and they pounced on him. They showed him a little bit of community justice before he was rescued and taken to the hospital. Fortunate for him, Matheri healed and went on to live his life. If you ask me, where is Geoffrey Matheri today? I'll have no answers for you. The only thing I can tell you is that he is not dead, because that will have made it to national news. He might be out there just living his life. He might have figured out things, or maybe he's a street guy in another town, or maybe he is your neighbor.